You guys still there?
Yes,
Yes.
I'm here.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Hi. Okay, cool. Sorry for the break, but my husband's video cam only has so much memory, and we've been going for a while. Okay. So back to freedom from poverty. As I said, for a variety of reasons, Chong questions whether a legal approach to socioeconomic rights is workable. We've discussed justiciability, but he has deeper concerns about treating socioeconomic rights from a legal perspective. Chong's primary concern is that the legal approach does not have the power to mobilize the poor at the grassroots level. It tends to be an elitist endeavor requiring special training, obviously as an attorney. As a result, the Human Rights Project tends to alienate the people that it is intended to serve. I should pause to note that I think that he is inconsistent here, since he later argues, like Donnelly, that human rights are the global lingua franca of moral thought. This would suggest that human rights are very effective in mobilizing ordinary citizens. In any event, the point here is that once human rights gained their footing and became recognized as legal rights, the Human Rights Project became increasingly inaccessible to the average person. Chong raises the additional concern that even where economic and social rights have been litigated, the litigation tends to benefit only a small number of people and may result in further stratification of the poor according to whether they have a claim that can be litigated or not. Perhaps the most difficult obstacle to overcome is the intransigence of the US vis-a-vis the entrenchment of social and economic rights as binding human rights. To overcome this obstacle, it is really necessary to enter the political realm and engage in an ideological debate, something that human rights lawyers are reluctant to do because it may require sacrificing their status as objective technicians. Moreover, lawyers that primarily populate the human rights community may not have a suitable background to take on the debate in any case. Addressing the ideological issues that prevent the entrenchment of economic and social rights really requires a broad social science background and, of course, an understanding of macroeconomics. Human rights activists would be required to engage in neoliberal theory that only growth can conquer poverty. The counter-argument put forward by Amartya Sen et al. That societies could achieve tremendous improvements in the livelihoods of their poorest members through growth mediated or support-led by policies even where there is low or negative GDP growth has gained currency, but it is clearly a minority position in the West. In the court of public opinion, this comes down to the battle of experts. If the public behaves like juries do, where two experts take exactly opposite points of view, it is likely to be a wash. That is to say, first of all, when it's highly technical, the public really doesn't understand. And second of all, if you have one expert who is highly regarded, who argues on one side of the case, then we have another expert who is highly regarded, who argues the opposite point of view, everyone's going to say, I don't get it, I don't know, and so nothing really comes of it. So obviously, in this case, that would be to the benefit of the neoliberals, since the public would then be reluctant to disturb the status quo, which it in any event doesn't really understand. People don't willingly risk what they have in favor of something they might have, particularly where that thing that they might have they do not even understand. Accordingly, Chong prefers a moral assault on global poverty. Going back to that statement I've just made, people are risk averse. You've heard the expression one bird in the hand is worth two birds in the bush, right? So if you have something, you're not willing to give it up and take the risk that you might have something more if you behave differently. Chong believes that the groups best able to address economic and social rights at the ideological level are members of the social justice movement. By the social justice movement, Chong means the sustained collective effort to combat extreme poverty through both institutional lobbying and extra-institutional organizing. The movement includes lobbying groups, think tanks, academic institutions, labor unions, religious groups, indigenous groups, and influential individuals. The social justice movement primarily relies on moral arguments. Chong points out that the moral struggle for civil and political rights preceded their entrenchment in international legal instruments. It is therefore not unreasonable to suppose that moral arguments must similarly precede the entrenchment of economic and social rights. Nonetheless, human rights rhetoric has entered the field largely because it has become the universal language of moral claims. As I previously noted, he seems a bit inconsistent here. While social justice organizations are increasingly including human rights approaches, it is a new trend and their numbers are fairly small. When they find it advantageous, they appropriate human rights ideas and language to serve their purposes. By contrast, social justice groups at the left end of the spectrum embrace an understanding of human rights is primarily rooted in international legal standards. They refer to the Universal Declaration and the Economic, Social, and Cultural Covenant. They also tend to make greater use of the legal and quasi-legal mechanisms in their work. Plainly, they more closely resemble traditional human rights organizations in this regard, and as a result are more likely to have access to funding through traditional gatekeeper institutions or organizations. The vast majority of social justice groups use human rights language to define their work, but tend not to associate human rights directly with international legal standards. The moral approach usually boils down to human rights to broad principles such as the equality, dignity, and justice. Typically, they express these principles in a form that actually avoids legal language. He points out that this kind of moral rights rhetoric can often precede legal institutionalization and enforcement, but that legalization is not a necessary later step for human rights to retain their power as important tools for social justice. Chong argues that this rhetoric is more than mere packaging to get the support of private foundations. For some groups, a human rights approach engenders a profound change away from service delivery or the charity model towards a more participatory, empowering strategy. But even where it is primarily rhetorical, it is not empty or meaningless where there are strategic implications to framing, naming, or branding an issue in a particular way. Consistent with what he describes as his thin constructivist view, human rights rhetoric legitimizes ideas. Where human rights have become the lingua franca of more global moral thought, invoking rights implies a corresponding duty for other actors to respect, protect, or fulfill a right. Human rights rhetoric demands that powerful actors be accountable to everyone, but particularly to the most vulnerable segments of society. It removes poverty from discussions of economic efficiency and numerical cost-benefit analysis. This is, of course, important where efficiency arguments can be employed for such purposes as denying access to medical care for the poor. Neoliberal logic is akin to social Darwinism, as I've already said, and tends not to concern itself with the most vulnerable populations who are faced with daunting poverty in no small part generated by the neoliberal system itself. So we are then faced with the problem of justice. The human rights approach enables social justice movements to reframe poverty as an issue of justice rather than one of charity. Why is that important? Anybody care to speak to that? I know we're short on time, but does anybody care to speak to why we want to address it as an obligation rather than mere charity, a state obligation?
I think.
Go ahead, Mina. I'm sorry.
I think we can reflect through how Millennium Goal has changed to SDG, and how SDG compared to the past Millennium Development Goal now contains, I think it's goal 16 or 14 as justice. So I've been interested in this for the past few years actually, and I had a visit to Haiti for a week to do like a Bible, like a summer school with children from Haiti. And what I saw was that even if there are many aids that have been going in, for instance, there has been US aid that has been going into Haiti, and that could be considered as one of the charity in a sense, I think. But that hasn't really solved a very rooting problem that has been existing in society.
But
For
Mina, I'm going to
instance,
interrupt you because my question to you was,
yeah.
why do we want it to be regarded as an obligation rather than a matter of charity? What is the nature of charity, and why does it not fix, say, the situation you find in Haiti? What is the nature
Because
of charity?
charity is about giving,
Okay, but it's about giving how?
giving without compensation, giving without getting in return.
Okay,
Just giving.
that's a very nice,
It also means giving without, and there's no obligation. So if it's
exactly.
charity, give as you wish, no minimum amount, no regularity. If it's obligation or some kind of state law, then it's much more enforceable.
Right, so,
It's also the level of accountability and oversight which is given to it. If it's just a form of charity, then the onus in terms of trying to ensure that every dollar is accounted for and properly utilized is diminished because it's seen as akin to a gift rather than some sort of, as Professor Brenner said, obligation. So if there's an obligation, it means at least the apparatus to both review and analyze is much more rigorous.
okay, but there's more problems than that. And it's not merely on the side of the people who provide charity, but also first that charity can be discriminating, right? That is to say, I'm going to give to the deserving poor, I'm not going to give to all poor people, right? I'm going to discriminate between people of different religions or people of different ethnicities or people of who have not been known to commit a crime, right? So I'm only going to give to the deserving poor as I define it, rather than all people who are poor and in vulnerable situations of one sort or another. And at the other side of charity, if you had been given charity, what is the sort of mental set of the person receiving charity?
I think it'd be very, I mean, not many people like receiving charity, even those who are in quite desperate situations.
And why is that?
It's like a handout. It's like I think it's also a matter of pride. You don't want to just be given these things.
So in some sense it's demeaning, right? Because you have to accept this handout because you're desperate. But there's more than that, because if you receive charity, there is a relationship between the person giving the charity and the person receiving it, where suddenly the person receiving it, even if they overcome the demeaning aspect and are prepared for whatever reason, perhaps because their children are starving, prepared to accept a charitable gift, the next problem is now they have this sort of sense that they are obligated to the person who gave them that gift, right?
Yeah.
So there's a sort of a dual aspect to what's happening in the case of charitable giving. So we have with charity we have the problem that aiding the poor is purely a voluntary matter. It invites judgments about the worthiness of the poor. Where a particular individual or group of individuals are in need, the charitable impulse need not extend itself to those that the donor, as I've already said, deems in some sense unworthy. It also creates a mental set among the poor that they are somehow internally obligated to those who would help them. It is a very different point of view on both sides than that which is bred by social and economic entitlements. Where they exist, they cannot easily be withdrawn. So you don't have this sense that you have this huge obligation to the person who is kind enough to help you. When extending them in the first instance, there is no judgment of moral worthiness of the recipients. The only relevant criterion, which is fundamental to all human rights, is whether one is a human and therefore entitled to minimum standards of dignity. But we have the problem of catching the support of the American public. Because there exists the real danger that moderate social justice groups will be disparaged as socialists, much like FDR, foreign and un-American, human rights must be disassociated from distributional substantive equality and instead reconnect it with the notion of a minimum standard below which no one may be allowed to fall. The end goal is to legitimize a justice-based understanding of poverty that changes society's notion of its responsibility to end poverty. While this can have an impact on courts whose members are shaped by the culture in which they function, Chong maintains that political and moral accountability can be just as effective, if not more effective, in ensuring remedies for victims of poverty. Because they are better able to take on the ideological debate, conceptualizing rights as basic moral principles can help subsistence rights activists confront the United States government while circumventing the debate over legal rights. They can encourage other kinds of commitment to which the state can be held politically accountable, for instance, and of course Mina just mentioned this, the Millennium Development Goals, right? Development and human rights share many traits in common, and here we're going back again to a discussion we had in connection with Donnelly. Development focuses on the enhancement of capabilities and freedoms that members of the community enjoy. Human rights represents the claims that individuals have on the conduct of